They didn't fall out of love. They fell out of lies. Last night, their mask confessed before their mouth did. My child, I saw their heart. It was never in it. There, I love you was a borrowed line. God heard what they whispered when you left the room. You weren't loved. You were tolerated. They held your hand while planning an exit. What you felt was real. What they gave was rehearsed. Their eyes lied slower than their mouth. You sensed it, and still hoped it was fear, not fact. They called you soulmate, but prayed to forget you. You were genuine. They were practicing. They weren't confused. They were careful not to be exposed. They performed love until it got inconvenient. Their affection expired weeks before their presence did. My child, that silence wasn't peace, it was pretense. They only stayed to ease their guilt. You were poetry. They skimmed your soul like a headline. That goodbye happened long before their lips moved. They spoke your name with a mouth full of doubt. God heard them call you, too much in their thoughts. They mirrored your love, but never held it. Your soul glowed. They shielded their eyes. You fell. They were measuring the fall. You weren't the one. They just didn't want to be alone. They pretended to care so they wouldn't look like the villain. They whispered, "I'm faking," while your heart was praying. You mistook effort for investment. Their feelings were curated, not born. They called it connection. God called it delay. You were faithful to someone who rehearsed every word. God waited until midnight to show you the mask. They smiled with their mouth and sighed with their soul. You were all in. They were already halfway gone. Their embrace was an exit plan. They stayed for comfort, not covenant. Your tears meant nothing to someone acting the part. God heard them plan their next chapter without your name in it. They wanted the benefits of your love, not the weight of it. You kissed them with eternity. They replied with convenience. They called you home, but slept beside escape. You read them like scripture. They skimmed you like fiction. They promised forever with a tongue that knew endings. You gave them your soul. They rented your time. They wanted your light, not your truth. They called you safe but longed for chaos. God heard them say, "I'm faking," and you felt it in your bones. You didn't lose love. You dodged deception. You prayed for answers. Their lie became the sermon. If this touched your soul, don't scroll, comment your favorite quote and subscribe for more. You kept waiting for their heart. God heard them waiting for their exit. Their love was costume, not covenant. They held your face and hid their indifference. They were practicing intimacy, not living it. My child, you were the realest thing in a false chapter. They said the right words while rehearsing their escape. They kept your body but returned your spirit unopened. You were sacred. They played you like a scene. The way they touched you wasn't rooted in love, only habit. They used your devotion as cover. You offered your forever. They were counting days. Their love had deadlines. Yours was divine. They loved the reflection, not the soul. They smiled while secretly plotting silence. You bloomed. They pretended to water. Their hearts stayed guarded while yours stayed open. God heard their laughter while your pillow held tears. They said, "I'm tired," but meant, "I'm done." Their energy left long before their footsteps. They said love. They meant performance. You fought to keep what never truly arrived. They called you mine while longing for elsewhere. Their "I love you" had punctuation. Yours had prayer. They rehearsed honesty. You lived it. They loved being wanted, not being known. You lit candles. They planned closure. Their heart never responded. Only their ego did. God revealed their intention through their indifference. They never forgot you. They just faked remembering. You gave meaning. They gave mimicry. They performed love just long enough to keep you quiet. You hoped their silence was softness. It was strategy. You weren't holding love. You were holding illusion. They held your dreams in hands that trembled with guilt. God saw the mask slip when you turned away. You poured spirit into someone filling silence. They said, "I'm just faking," but your soul already knew. You apologized for loving too deeply. They never apologized for lying. You offered healing. They performed crisis. They wanted your presence, not your depth. They stayed only long enough to be missed. Their plan was to leave you wondering. God interrupted the lie before it became law. They learned your language just to blend in. You were their comfort, not their commitment. Their actions never aligned with your prayers. You lit up for someone already looking away. They turned your loyalty into their exit strategy. My child, they weren't confused. They were calculating. They used your faith to stay longer than they should. You were the sacred they couldn't carry. They craved devotion, not responsibility. They knew how to hold you, not how to choose you. Your softness was their shelter, not their mirror. They wanted to be loved, not changed. You became a haven for someone hiding. Their story was missing you, even while you were in it. They confessed to the night what they denied you by day. You asked, "Why does it feel empty?" God answered, "There almost kept you chained longer than goodbye ever would." You gave clarity. They gave comfort they didn't mean. You were a prayer. They treated you like a pastime. They never wanted to become what you saw in them. God let you feel what they refused to say. Their silence was a pre-written ending. They loved you just enough to stay guiltless. You kept giving. They kept gathering. They promised forever with a heart stuck in yesterday. They practiced emotions they never planned to keep. You wrote a love letter. They skimmed it for escape. There, I'm trying was never about building, only staying hidden. You saw forever. They saw convenience. Their feelings were scheduled. Yours were sacred. You weren't wrong, they were just acting. They asked you to stay, just to soften their exit. They kissed you with one foot already leaving. You forgave things they never planned to change. Their truth was always wrapped in delay. You loved deeply. They loved when it was easy. God heard the lie and held your name in mercy. They said, "I'm just faking," while your soul cried softly. You lit up rooms they barely noticed. They wanted you quiet, not whole. They took pieces of you and left puzzles. Their hugs held hesitation. You weren't dramatic. You were discerning. They never planned to stay, just to linger. They watched your love like a fire they feared. They confessed to shadows what they denied your eyes. You deserved presence, not performance. Their care was timing, not truth. You gave full heart to a part-time soul. Their mask cracked. You still hoped. They held you without honoring you. My child, even your pain was holy. They didn't break you. They revealed what needed to be released. God pulled the curtain while you were still praying. They lied in whispers. God revealed in thunder. You didn't fail. You were freed. If this touched your soul, don't scroll, comment your favorite quote, and subscribe for more. They kissed you with lips that never meant to stay. God heard them confess what they've been hiding in plain sight. You kept believing. They kept rehearsing. They said, "I'm faking," while you were still writing forever. Your soul trembled because truth had entered the room. They held your hand, but never your heart. My child, they never planned to love you, only to need you. You were sacred. They were pretending. God removed the veil last night, now you know. They only loved the version of you that didn't ask questions. You weren't wrong. You were just too faithful. They wore sincerity like a costume. God didn't let you hear it because it would have shattered you. They stayed out of guilt, not grace. There, I love you was strategy, not soul. You kept showing up. They kept showing off. My child, your ache was the prophecy. They rehearsed honesty, but never lived it. Their lips said love. Their eyes whispered exit. You kept praying. They kept pretending. You gave real. They gave routine. They studied your softness for control. They weren't afraid of losing you, just being exposed. You offered sanctuary. They played survivor. That pain wasn't confusion. It was God unveiling the lie. They whispered forever, knowing they meant for now. You were the answer. They were performing the question. Their arms held you, but their spirit hid. You looked for hope. They left hints of absence. They didn't love you. They feared being alone. My child, your love was true, too true for the fraud they were faking. You gave depth. They gave delay. They studied your tears for escape routes. You were divine presence. They treated you like proof. God let you love them just long enough to see clearly. You carried dreams. They carried disguise. They wanted your loyalty, not your light. My child, last night they said your name like a burden. You deserved covenant. They gave convenience. They didn't fall out of love. They never entered it. They laughed with others about the love you begged for. You prayed beside someone who only wanted your silence. God exposed the lie before it owned you. You weren't too much. They were too empty. They practiced goodbye in their mind while holding your body. My child, you loved someone rehearsing betrayal. You didn't imagine it. You survived it. They tested your love and failed your worth. You were being worshipped in heaven while tolerated on earth. If this touched your soul, don't scroll, like, comment your favorite quote, and subscribe for more. They memorized your love language, not your soul. You kept sacrificing. They kept acting. They didn't forget your birthday. They just rehearsed distance. God didn't let them fool your spirit forever. You loved someone who only loved the idea of being loved. Their smile was a distraction from what they buried. They stayed long enough to be remembered, not forgiven. You were feeding someone who only came to taste. Their hands held you like a secret, not a promise. God caught every tear they called dramatic. They said forever to delay your leaving. You were late. They feared what it revealed. You were asking for presence. They were planning absence. They studied your pain like a path. My child, they lied to themselves before they lied to you. They kissed you with guilt on their breath. Their touch was trembling with truth they wouldn't speak. You gave soul. They gave performance. God let you stay until you saw the mask slip. They didn't stay for you. They stayed for their comfort. You begged for honesty. They offered illusion. They rehearsed that smile. You were never hard to love. They just never intended to. My child, I watched you give your all to a ghost. They cried when exposed, not when they hurt you. You stayed loyal to someone temporary. They left breadcrumbs, not a path. Your prayers were too honest for their games. They were collecting your loyalty like insurance. You felt their withdrawal before they said a word. God watched them say your name with hesitation. They used your hope as a shield for their guilt. You loved someone who loved your reflection more than your truth. They promised change and delivered charm. They admired your light but resented your knowing. Their energy confessed what their lips never could. You begged for effort. They performed convenience. God revealed the lie through their delay. They whispered doubts, louder than they ever whispered love. You kissed someone who had already imagined another name. You stayed wholly in a house full of pretending. They needed your belief to survive their lie. They used your trust as shelter. They said, I love you like a transaction. God heard them rehearse the goodbye while you were sleeping. You carried their silence like scripture. You deserved covenant. They offered costume. They paused after I love you. That was the real confession. You were giving forever to someone thinking temporary. My child, you didn't imagine their absence. It just wasn't spoken. You trusted what was time to trick you. They feared your discernment more than your distance. You waited for depth. They replied with delay. God kept giving you signs. You kept hoping for change. They called it love. Heaven called it a test. They gave you warmth on borrowed time. You outgrew the lie before it was spoken. They studied your soul like strategy. You held their chaos like sacred duty. Their apology was delay in disguise. You weren't loved, you were observed. They gave affection just enough to keep you silent. God saw the game before it began. You called it divine. They called it useful. They used your waiting as a mask. You were the prayer they never knew how to receive. Their presence was a placeholder. You forgave rehearsed apologies. They feared what your love would require of them. My child, your ache is holy. They said, I'm just faking. God said, now they're revealed. You gave realness to someone addicted to roles. They praised your softness and feared your truth. You weren't too intense. They were too shallow. They knew they couldn't match the love you carried. You became the mirror they couldn't face. They hid behind charm while you wept into your prayers. You saw their soul. They couldn't survive that light. Their arms stayed. Their heart left long ago. You were loved by heaven while tolerated by them. They waited for you to leave so they wouldn't have to. You were all in. They were halfway gone. Their affection came with a timer. You held hands with a performance. My child, they confessed to the night what you carried as hope. You gave patience. They gave plot. They left before you noticed and still made you blame yourself. You answered dishonesty with devotion. They wore the mask well until God removed the lights. You didn't lose love. You lost illusion. They kissed you while planning an ending. You gave them prayer. They gave you pause. God stopped the lie before it became your lifestyle. They loved your presence, not your person. You tried to save something that only existed in your heart. They didn't fake the feeling, they faked the future. You kept rewriting the story. They already ended it. You hoped their delay was fear. It was detachment. God heard the truth. He's freeing you from the weight of pretending.